Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year. So, this afternoon, I would like to share with you 3 short stories about the best education I ever had, the most fun I ever had teaching, before I came here, that is, and the most unexpected lesson I ever learned. And best education I ever had was in Germany, at the Cologne Academy of Music and Dance, with the great violinist Igor Ozim, well known to you all, I'm certain. Because Ozim was a perfectionist. He was notorious in those days for taking elite students and making them play nothing but open strings for months and rebuilding their technique from the bottom up. Imagine being, an elite athlete and going to a coach who makes you relearn how to walk. It's like that. Well, mercifully, I escaped that. But for the first few weeks I was there, I practiced one dotted rhythm in a Brahms sonata for hours a day until my arms were like the inside of a Swiss watch. And every lesson was a masterclass, literally, because Ozim taught in a huge, high room overlooking the city, with tables all round the walls and a grand piano in the middle with a fearsome accompanist. And students would drop in and out all day, sit around, listen to each other, criticize each other, translate the jokes. And our aim was to develop the highest technical perfection in the service of the deepest interpretation of the music, focalized through the unique personality of the performer, because a musician, like any artist, plays the person they are, as well as the instrument and the music. But to do that, Ozim was also teaching us to hold ourselves open to that mysterious inspiration that comes from beyond the music or the performer, but sometimes just strikes the performance and ignites the air between the performer and the audience, and puts us in touch with something we can't reach out and capture, but which can capture us. It was unbelievably hard work. It was also a joyous dance of craft and creativity, muscle and brain and soul. And it was essentially exactly the same exercise as we perform as academics, when we hone our skills to interpret the world around us, but also hold ourselves open to revealing sometimes something beyond what we can reach for ourselves, but which can reveal itself through us. For some reason, though, I think we are less good, or maybe just less brave than musicians and other artists at expressing what we're trying to do in academic work. But I think we should be braver about that. Well, that was learning. The most fun I ever had teaching was in a very different space, because for many years when I taught at Oxford University, my favorite teaching gig of the year was the day I spent teaching MBA students at the business school the elements of ancient Greek rhetoric. Now, as in all business schools, these students were paying a lot of money for a course which they hoped would equip them to earn a lot more. So they were really listening. And my course centered on Aristotle's Rhetoric, which is still the best book ever written in the West about how to use language to get people to do what you want. Anybody wants a recommendation of a translation? Email me afterwards. Everything he says about choosing your words, constructing a sentence and a point and a speech, how to use rhythm and imagery, how to pitch and pace your voice, it all still works as well today as it did in the 4th century BCE. But the most interesting sections are where he talks about the mechanics of argument. And not coincidentally, those are also the sections which highlight the tricky ethics of persuasion. Because Aristotle shows you how to make a formally logical argument, which if your premises are defensible, your facts are right, and so on, will lead to a sound conclusion. But he also knows that the most persuasive arguments are rarely about facts or logic. Much more often, they're about probabilities and the assumptions of the audience. So, you might, for instance, start a speech by saying a few things we all know, or think we know, about human nature or the world we live in. And then applying those assumptions to your topic, you speculate about what is likely to be true, or likely to be the best thing to do. And Aristotle called this type of argument an enthymeme. We call it probabilistic, and it is very familiar because it is the stuff of a great deal of contemporary public discourse, not to mention computer algorithms and data analytics and AI. And it is attractive because it appeals to the accumulation of our lived experience, the mosaic of observation and impression and inference and report that we build up over lifetimes, And we rely on that all the time, and often it works quite well. Where it works less well is when the facts we're dealing with are novel or not typical, or we're going to have to do something different from usual. Because the enthymeme doesn't really encourage us to look at the specific, the actual, the new. But we, like Aristotle, live in a fast-changing world where it sometimes feels as if the facts and our good or realistic options are just changing all the time. And then enthymemes become risky. And that, I think, is one of the major challenges of our public discourse today. But describing the enthymeme was not Aristotle's only major new contribution to rhetoric. He also saw that a crucial part of persuading anyone about anything is making them believe not just your words, but yourself. And credibility can be engineered. You do it by projecting a character, which will resonate with your audience, which Aristotle called ethos, and appealing to their emotions, which he called pathos. And to construct the character that will appeal to your audience, you find out as much as possible about them, what they want, what they're frightened of, and then you present yourself as the person they need. Wise, energetic, forward-looking, whatever they're going to like. And in that character, you play on their emotions. Maybe you rile them up by telling them that your opponent is trying to take something away from them. Or calm them down by assuring them that whatever they want is what you want. The more precisely you can play on people's emotions, the more power you have. And along with the enthymeme, ethos and pathos are still the most powerful tools in all kinds of discourse today. And Aristotle could see, as well as we can, that this is a big risk, especially to the quality of public life and relationships, which was something he cared about a lot. And it worried him a lot. So he tried to find a way to tie rhetoric to morality and make it not just effective, but good. And roughly, he did it by arguing that the aim of human life is eudaimonia, happiness or human flourishing. And we flourish when we do what we are designed to do best, which he thought involves exercising reason in accordance with virtue, because he argued being good, part of being human. And so, according to Aristotle, someone who speaks in public could, in theory, be a self-interested, manipulative charlatan who only cares about wealth and power, but who would want to be such a person? Problem seems to be that in practice, quite a lot of people Quite happy to be that person. When I was teaching my MBA students, I worried about that a lot. They were very nice people, I'd like just to say. But I could teach them the elements of rhetoric in a day, and they were drinking it in. But I couldn't teach them to love goodness in a day. And if they didn't love goodness already, wasn't I just teaching them how to exploit people? And I never solved that problem. And I don't think we've solved it in education in general or in public life. And it is one of the big questions we face today, and not least when we study and teach in a university. Can we find ways to tie discourse and persuasion to goodness and truth more effectively than Aristotle? Well, my last story is about the most unexpected lesson I ever learned, which happened soon after I was ordained, about 22 years ago. At the time, I was a professor at Oxford, and as I started serving in a parish, it struck me that there were useful parallels between my university teaching and preaching and teaching in the parish, and also between my pastoral responsibilities for my students and my work with my congregation. And it seemed likely to me, and for me, that my experience of university teaching would inform my teaching in the parish, because I thought I was quite good, Been doing it for a while by then. But my pastoral training for ministry might inform my pastoral work with students, for which I hadn't had any training at all. What happened was exactly the opposite. Because as a teacher, I would often play with ideas, spinning a line to see where it went, playing devil's advocate to make students think, and it was fun. And it did make them think. And I didn't necessarily worry about whether it made for the best interpretation of the material. Getting them to think was enough. But you can't stand up in a pulpit and spin a line. Or if you do, you are making a fool of your own faith and your congregations. In a pulpit, you can only talk as honestly and carefully as you can about what you believe to be truth. So my congregation taught me that if something is worth teaching, it's worth teaching seriously. And it changed the way I taught. On the other hand, and some of you will know this, when you are ordained and put on any kind of clerical uniform, your congregation instantly concludes that you are much wiser and more pastorally gifted than you actually are. And they will entrust you with their needs and fears and doubts in a way not many 30-year-olds are realistically well equipped to deal with. And it's so tempting to go along with it and pretend you are much wiser and more spiritual than you are. But that way lies self-deception and hypocrisy and potentially real harm to other people. I was saved from it, I think, by my students, because they knew I had no training in pastoral care for them. They certainly didn't think I had any gifts of the Spirit. They were classicists, they weren't interested in that stuff. If they came to me, it was just on the basis of my lived experience, however limited. They wanted my honest opinion and no more. And I realized that essentially that was what I had to offer my congregation too. And it was not nothing. On a good day, it was not without the Spirit. But I had better not imagine it was more than it was. So my students taught me humility in pastoral encounters, which I hope I've never forgotten. So, 3 stories. and 3 reflections on education. When we learn and teach and practice what we learn, we're trying to develop our human, physical, intellectual capabilities to the utmost. But we also have to learn to hold ourselves open to the inspiration that comes from far beyond us and is the thing that ignites what we say and do and reveals mysteries beyond our grasp. And we all want to communicate effectively, reach out to people, and change hearts and minds. But if we do it only for our own benefit, without caring about goodness or truth, then what we say is liable to damage, even destroy, the very fabric of relationships and societies that we depend on. And sometimes, however accomplished we are, the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. Which all brings us to the book of Proverbs and the passage we've just heard. The fascinating thing I find about ancient, ethical, or wisdom writing is that it is so rooted in and committed to the everyday, the world we live in. And at the same time, it is so idealistic. Maybe more than any other genre of writing. It wants to do the fullest justice, both to the material and to the metaphysical domain. Wisdom walks the walls of her city. She stands in the marketplace and looks around. She observes people and donkeys and swallows and ants. And she knows the value of a cellar full of wine and a business partner who keeps their word and a tradesman who doesn't lean on his scales. And she celebrates love and physical pleasure and worries about prostitution and gender relations. She celebrates community and worries when people fall out and abuse the law. And at the same time, she is just constantly tantalized and tries to infiltrate her listeners with the sense of a God whose thoughts and ways are as far above everyday life as the heavens are above the earth, who precedes and exceeds everything that is, who commands existence, and to whom everything belongs and is answerable, and whom we can never reach out and grasp, but whom we can meet and be shown that we are wonderfully made, and learn that we are known, and feel that we are loved, and to whom we can respond with love and awe and learning. Because wisdom celebrates not least that God made humanity to learn about the world and about God. And God, like any teacher, is delighted when humanity wants to learn. So in today's reading, wisdom says, listen to my instruction. Very keen, listen to my instruction. I have things to say. And find not only knowledge and expertise, but life itself, as the favor of the Lord falls on your learning and ignites it. Wait in my doorway and watch at my doors, because wisdom may come into your life from directions you didn't expect. And when you listen, you will hear wisdom speak, both persuasively and trustworthily. A truth that touches those that hear it and turns their hearts and minds towards God. And that is Proverbs' way of squaring the circle that Aristotle struggled with between persuasion and goodness. And the writer does it essentially by seeing the source of persuasion and goodness as a personal God who actively creates humanity and determines its default state as good in relation to its creator. And that brings some challenges of its own, which we won't get into now. But it does offer a vision of how what we learn and how we communicate are connected with why we learn and why learning must be good. And to shape that vision, the writer looks back to the first creation narrative in the book of Genesis and makes wisdom say, the very first of God's works was me. And I was there, the Word, when everything else was spoken into being. So I can tell you, but before you ever spoke a word, you were spoken. You are made of words. And if you speak in the way, some later commentators would say, in the image of the Word which spoke everything into being, then your speech will be good, as the one who created you is good and saw that you were made good. But if your speech is self-serving, manipulative, untruthful, then you are no longer in touch with its source, and what you say can only end badly. Well, here we are at the beginning of a new academic year, ready to learn, ready to teach, ready to enjoy our surroundings and our shared life here. And wisdom celebrates all those things and also points beyond them, saying, while you are working to learn and think and communicate the best you can, be open to that inspiration that ignites your learning beyond any human power. And while you're studying wisdom in the places you have chosen, don't forget that it sometimes comes from unexpected places. And remember that before you ever spoke, or listened, or read, or wrote, you were spoken. And the words that do good in this world are the words that speak in the ways of wisdom, and the word that brought us all into being. And last but not least, as you pursue wisdom, be as joyful as she is, as she rejoices in the presence of God and delights in humankind. Thank you.